What's up YouTube? This is Guy, and today I am putting together a long overdue video. We're talking about my 5 loves and 5 hates of the Rolex Explorer. If you've been following my channel, watching all of my videos, you're well aware that several months ago, earlier this year anyway, I had purchased a brand new Rolex Explorer. And over the course of several months, I came to the conclusion that it just was not quite right for me. It wasn't the forever watch that I was hoping it was going to be, and I sold it. A lot of people undoubtedly have been wondering, why could I possibly have not been in love with that watch? What could have been wrong with it for me to decide that it just wasn't the watch for me? Hopefully this video will clear some of that up, and maybe it'll help people that are going down the path of purchasing one from themselves if they're still in the decision-making process. This isn't going to be the typical love/hate video that you are probably used to seeing from other YouTubers. I'm not going to just do a random list of 5 things I loved and a separate random list of 5 things I hated. I'm going to talk about specific aspects of the watch and things that I loved and hated about those aspects. So that'll become a little bit clearer as I go through the video if you don't understand exactly what I mean. So let's just go ahead and jump right in. Number 1 on the list of things that I loved and hated, we're going to talk about the design, the presentation, the overall feel of the watch. Things that I loved, first and foremost, the dial, the handset, the overall aesthetic of this watch. It has a beautiful simplicity in its symmetry. You know, and when I look at that watch, it's still to this day one of the most perfectly designed watches. It has the most perfect presentation of any watch that I've ever seen on the market. I absolutely am still in love with it, and I don't think there's anything that beats it in terms of just the overall look and feel and presentation. Next thing, you know, I really loved the Chromolite lume that Rolex uses in its most recent iterations. I know they used a Super Luminova or some other lume in the past, but this new Chromolite lume, absolutely fantastic. Glows a radiant, beautiful blue. Lasts an extremely long time. Totally in love with the Chromolite lume. Another thing, the overall polishing, the final finishing, in particular on this watch, and I assume this applies to all Rolexes, but on this watch in particular, the sides of the case and the bezel, I mean, it just presents like absolute jewelry. It has a level of polish unlike any other watches that I've had the experience of beholding. Top notch, 100% perfect when it comes to the overall finishing of the watch. Something that isn't talked about a lot when it comes to Rolex watches in general, and of course the Rolex Explorer is no exception, the end links. There's something really interesting about the end links. If you look at them closely, they are, I mean, just sculpted. You know, I mean, the machining that goes into the end links is outrageous, and it's a little thing to point out, to say like, man, they really do their end links well. But really nobody ever touches on how incredibly interesting, exquisitely finished, machined, and again, they just look sculpted, the end links on this watch are. And you know, the final thing when we're talking about the design, the presentation of this watch is just the subtle and understated look of it. It does literally work for any occasion, be it you know, something more formal to just an average, you know, around town in t-shirts and shorts. It really doesn't matter what you're wearing along with it. It just works perfectly for any and all occasions. Now, when we talk about the design, presentation, the overall feel of the watch, there are things that I hated about it too. You know, number 1, the size and weight. It wears really big, despite the fact that it's only quote-unquote 39 millimeters. Once you really get into it and you talk about the heft of it on the wrist, you look at those other dimensions besides the 39 millimeter case. In particular, we're talking about the lug-to-lug distance. This watch wears more like it is a 40 millimeter watch than if it were it's closer to 40 than it is closer to 38 millimeters, if that makes sense. So it wears big. In my opinion, that's a negative. I wish it wore a little smaller. If I had my way, I wish they knocked it down to 38 millimeters and maybe shortened the overall lug-to-lug width a millimeter or 2. I believe it went up from the previous generations when it was a 36 millimeter diameter. I think the lug-to-lug width went up 3-ish, or maybe almost 4 millimeters. So it does really wear quite large, despite the fact that it's marketed as being a 39 millimeter watch. That's a little bit of a problem for me. Another thing that I hate about the design, the presentation, and the overall feel of the watch is the 904L stainless steel, which is touted by Rolex as being some sort of super steel. It's not all it's cracked up to be. In particular, it's a scratch magnet. And if you care about keeping your watches as pristine as possible for as long as possible, you're gonna have a real problem with that with this watch, on the high polished pieces in particular. And I had a lot of people commenting on my videos when I mentioned that in one of the reviews, that they found it to be exactly the same in their experience. They said that their Rolex Explorers were bigger scratch magnets than any other watches they owned, and I can absolutely confirm that. If I take a look at any of my cheap Seiko watches in 316L stainless steel, they don't attract scratches, scuffs, or blemishes nearly as readily as that Rolex did. Finally, something else that I hated about the overall design and presentation is the crystal, and it's a minor complaint. I didn't think it was an awful crystal, but the fact that it had no significant source of anti-reflective coating or properties, it did make the legibility suffer a little bit. So there's my loves and hates insofar as the discussion of the design, the presentation, and the feel of the watch. The next thing I want to talk about is the value. There's things that I loved and things that I hated when we talk about value of this watch. In my opinion, it's probably the best value proposition when we compare it to any of the other watches in the Rolex catalog. It's got an MSRP of $6,550, but you can easily get it for under $6,000 if you have any sort of relationship at all with an authorized dealer. You should be able to get probably 10% off, probably pick it up for something in the area of $5,900. That's not unreasonable. Now, of course, you can get into a very basic date just with a smooth bezel, or perhaps even an Oyster Perpetual for the same or less money, but those aren't really sports watches, and they don't particularly interest me. If I wanted to get into a date just, I'd be looking at a two-tone date just, and something that would end up being much more expensive. And I just don't have any interest in the Oyster Perpetuals. So yeah, in my opinion, it is the best value in the Rolex catalog. However, despite the fact that it's a really good value for a Rolex, something that I hate when we talk about value is that vis-a-vis other watches on the market, it's really not a great value. I mean, you're paying a whole lot for the brand and for the prestige of owning a Rolex, in my opinion. But personally, I didn't get a Rolex to be a status symbol. I got it because of the design, of the engineering, of the quality, of the craftsmanship, and all that is there. But I think when you talk about dollars, you're paying more than what you're really getting, unless you consider the fact that you're also paying for the brand and paying for the name. So yeah, vis-a-vis other watches on the market, I think it is a bit overpriced and it's not a great value, but it is a good value amongst other Rolex watches. The third thing I wanted to talk about in my list of loves and hates of this watch is the movement. Aside from the design and, the aesthetic of the watch, the movement was one of the main reasons I was drawn to the Explorer and to Rolexes in general. Of course, it has the caliber 3132 and it features, 48-hour power reserve, 28,800 vibrations per hour. It's a COSC plus Rolex Superlative certified chronometer that runs at plus or minus 2 seconds per day. It's got all kinds of awesome features like the Parachrome hairspring and the Paraflex shock absorbers, offering you greater resistance to shock, temperature, and magnetism. All that stuff is great, and I really love all of those aspects of the engineering of this watch. In theory, it's a great movement. And that's something that was really what attracted me to the Rolex brand in general, was that they seemed to go above and beyond when it came to their in-house movements. But something that I hated about mine in particular, there were problems with the movement. Number one, it didn't keep plus or minus 2 seconds per day of accuracy as advertised. On my wrist, on a daily basis, it was more like gaining 4 seconds per day. Now, of course, that's not awful. And when we talk about accuracy, that discussion is extremely polarizing. Some people will just argue till they're blue in the face that accuracy doesn't matter. And for other people, it does matter. I'm one of those people that it does matter. And I was definitely disappointed that my watch was running more than twice of what they advertised that I should be expecting. Another kind of weird thing, when I first got that watch, the internal oscillating bidirectional self-winding rotor was dead silent, so much so that like you wouldn't even think that there was a moving rotor inside the watch body. If you have cheaper watches, be it Seikos or Orients or any number of brands, you give the watch a little bit of a shake and you hear that rotor spinning. You can feel a little bit of a wobble. That was not the case with my Rolex for about maybe a month. Then eventually it started to have a very faint but noticeable wobble to the rotor. I could feel it spinning. It just sort of started out of nowhere. I don't know if that was a problem or not. Maybe that's just the way they break in. I took it to the authorized dealer where I bought it. They looked at it and said, nah, it's fine. Don't worry about it. It's keeping good time. It was a little, concerning to me, but I was assured that it wasn't a problem. There was some other minor idiosyncrasies about the movement as well, in particular things like when I unscrewed the crown. It would make kind of a weird little clicking noise when you would spin it in the reverse direction. So not if you were winding it to charge up the power reserve, but if you just slowly spun it the other way, there'd be like this weird little kind of clicking or grinding noise. Again, I don't know if that was normal or not. I would think no, but I've had people both say, my Rolex does do that. I've had other people say, no, your Rolex shouldn't do it. Mine doesn't do that. Something else that was annoying about the movement, when I was setting the time, as you would rotate the hour and minute hands, when you would release it, they would kind of wobble. There was like a little bit of resistance on them. So you try to set it exactly at, maybe the 56-minute hash mark, and it would wobble away from it as you released tension from the crown. So there was just a lot of little, like I said, idiosyncrasies about the movement itself that kind of had me concerned, but nothing major, nothing like, oh, it broke on me. But nevertheless, those were some of the things that I hated about the movement. But there was plenty of stuff to love about it too. It was, mechanically quite impressive, at least on paper. Number 4, though, of things that I love and hate about the Rolex Explorer, we're going to talk about the bracelet. I was going to discuss the bracelet in the first section when we were talking about the design, the presentation, the overall feel of the watch, but this needed its own section, its own specific discussion. I did love things about the bracelet. The 3-piece link Oyster bracelet with folding Oyster lock safety clasp is extremely high quality and well made. The finish on it was just absolutely beautifully brushed. As far as the clasp, had awesome fold-over safety latch, and the hinged clasp was incredible, excellent, very, very well machined. No other clasp that I've ever seen in any other watch even comes close to the quality and the craftsmanship of this, Rolex Oyster bracelet clasp. And the bracelet itself and the links, they were excellent too. I've already mentioned how much I liked the end links, so we don't really need to discuss that here. So yeah, the overall quality was just outstanding on the bracelet. However, there was some things that I hated about it. Number 1, it was just horribly uncomfortable for me. I found that the taper from 20 millimeters down to, I believe at the clasp end, it went all the way down to 15 millimeters if I'm not mistaken. It was just too extreme, too aggressive, and the Easy Link extension was all but useless for me. A 5 millimeter extension was just too much. Now, what that means is I could never find a correct size for the watch. It was either too tight and uncomfortable, or it was too loose and it was flopping around all over my wrist. I would have rather have had a cheap garbage Seiko style clasp that had 5 little micro adjustment holes at that point, just so that I could make it fit my wrist well and be comfortable. Now, on top of that, the watch, bracelet, and even the case have some very sharp edges. Not sharp in a way that is going to maybe cut you or injure you, just very, very clean, crisp edges. But what that meant was when your hand got a little bit sweaty, or your wrist got a little bit sweaty, and things started to swell up, if you were wearing the watch tight enough so that it's not flopping all over the place, now those sharp, crisp edges were biting into your skin, and after even a few minutes for me, I would have pretty aggressive indentations of the outline of the clasp and the edges of the case all over my wrist. And then if I popped open that Easy Link extension, it was just too big and the watch flopped all over and it was uncomfortable. Moral of the story is it would never fit me just right. And that's ultimately the main reason why I had a problem with this watch and probably why I got rid of it. So yeah, I loved, again, on paper, how incredible the bracelet was. Extremely well made, beautifully finished. The clasp with the exception of that extension, 5mm Easy Link extension, was outstanding. I've never seen anything quite as nice. Even the swing arm as you opened the clasp was finished beautifully with polishing, the Rolex logo, just outstanding. But all of that means nothing if the watch is uncomfortable, and it was, you know, the main culprit being problems that I had with the bracelet. Now, the fifth thing that we're going to talk about in closing here, I call these X factors because it's not really specifics about the Rolex Explorer, but just different things about the company that I do love and hate. I love the history and the heritage of the Explorer and Rolex in general. It's super cool if you're a watch nerd like I am, and like I'm sure most of you guys are that are watching it. There's something really special about the brand that you just can't explain. And they do make incredible high quality watches. Craftsmanship, the engineering, everything about them really is amazing, despite the fact that I think their price tag is a little bit too high. But there's something that I hate. If I wanted to talk about X factors and throw in a fifth hate, I guess it's that in the end, despite all of the research that I did, despite all of the time that I spent saving up for this watch and going to the authorized dealer, looking at it and getting to know it, thinking that this was going to be the perfect watch for me and something that I was going to keep forever, I hate the fact that it just didn't work out and I ended up having to sell it because I didn't look forward to putting it on every day after a few months, and it's not something that I wanted to have sit in my watch box the majority of the time. I hate the fact that it didn't work out to be what I had hoped it would be. So yeah, there you go, guys. There's my 5 loves and 5 hates. Again, it's a little bit of a different list than you might, be used to from other YouTubers, but I thought it was the best way for me to approach this discussion. And I hope you enjoyed it. As always, I appreciate you tuning in, and if you have questions or comments, leave them down below, of course. I'll be back later on this week, potentially early next week, with another review video. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Bye.